You know, investors are the darndest folks, right? You would think in a week when global hot stops, we're certainly heating up, stocks would be cooling down, at least a little. Then it's coming with a new report from the brokerage giant Morgan Stanley saying that business conditions are now at their lowest level since the financial crisis. So how to make sense of all of this and the market's surprising resilience through all of this? We've got market watcher Gary B. Smith, the Heritage Foundation's Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood. Gary, this doesn't make sense to me, but you've reminded oftentimes the market zig when it looks like they should zag. They were doing a lot of zigging. Why?
Yeah, I think the market is, it took the oil crisis, we'll call it, the attack on the tankers, in stride because it knows that we're in a different energy economy that we were even, 5-10 years ago. As far as trade, the other big one, tariffs with China and Mexico, they seem to, at least Mexico's off the table, and China seems to have stabilized. There's no new news,
right,
if you will. Despite, what you're saying about, Morgan Stanley said about the economy is fairly robust in most people's eyes. So people say, my gosh, if there's nothing wrong, it must be right. It's probably time to buy.
We should explain that Morgan Stanley report that tracks services, manufacturing, hiring. It's sort of like an all-inclusive index that now is at its lowest point since the financial crisis, but there are other reports that go just the opposite direction. Having said that, Colonel, I'd like to get your thoughts on the collective read from many that they don't think this Iran thing's going to blow up into anything. Obviously, they feel the same way as Gary said about China. They might be just looking at the half-full glass. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there isn't any positioning by any of the major actors for full-blown conflict. So, it kind of limits how bad things might get. I mean, as you had in an earlier section there about potential strikes against Iran based on what they continue to do, we rippled Tomahawk cruise missiles into Syria when chemical munitions were used by Bashar al-Assad. So you can have very limited responses in these very tense situations without escalating to full-blown war. And nobody is talking about anything like that vis-a-vis China. So I think it's limited in scope. All the cards are on the table. Folks have made their positions known. And as our other guest has talked about, the market has accounted for that. So unless something really crazy happens, I think this is just the normal that we see on a day-to-day basis.
If I could follow that up with you, Colonel, are you surprised that the Iranians, if this is true and they're behind these attacks, continue to do them? I mean, in the face of it seems like half our naval fleet, I should say, is in the region. They know what they must be tempting here, and they know the opposition they're getting this go-round from the entire Arab League. Not a fan of what they're up to.
Right, yes, folks, I mean, after 2 years, which is kind of crazy, they're still trying to understand President Trump. So in previous administrations, a regime like Iran would behave very badly. The United States or other Western powers would make all kinds of blustery statements, but then usually you would cede something. And this administration isn't willing to cede things, right? So if Iran is going to threaten international shipping, a major source of energy for much of the world, not so much for the United States anymore, we're going to stand our ground and tell them that that behavior is not acceptable. And I think people are understanding that position in the United States. Why Iran continues down this path? Well, they're the world sponsor of terrorism, fomenting a war in Yemen, threatening to attack U.S. interests in Iraq. It's just a crazy regime. And so I think the administration is fully justified and is on the proper path to hold this hard line.
So the crazy expectations are built into that. So let me ask you about that, Gary, because it was a weird day when gold was up and interest rates were down. And I don't quite get that.
Yeah, you and me both, Neil. I have to confess, the market, the interest rates, gold, normally a flight to gold is saying, oh my gosh, there's trouble out there. And, and then the interest rates come down. It's, I cannot figure that part out. You throw in what's happening with the dollar, what's happening with the euro, it's up and down. That to me is, I am as surprised at those moves as anyone else. That's why I tend to pull back and look at the market. In my opinion, the stock market is more pure at this point.
All right, gentlemen, I want to thank you both. I can't make head or tail of it. I'm comforted to know that sometimes you can't either, and you're the expert, so I appreciate
exactly.
that. Gentlemen, thank you. A wonderful Father's Day. In the meantime, she's got a